This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The China-U.S. relationship has been difficult in the past few years and is now at a new crossroads. How will the Biden administration approach its China policies? How will differences be managed? Biden has called for a review of U.S. supply chain. So what would a more self-reliant U.S. chain mean for China and the global economy? To talk about those issues, I'm joined in the first half of our show by Cheng Li, director of the Thornton China Center of the Brookings Institution, and later by Douglas Paal, distinguished fellow of the Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That is our topic. I'm Zhou Yue. President Joe Biden signed an executive order directing a 100-day review of potential vulnerabilities in U.S. supply chains for critical items, including semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, electric vehicle batteries, and rare earth elements. So, Cheng Li, let's start with this latest development. What do you make of the choices of these items? Obviously, some of the supply chains are located in Asia or the neighboring economies. Is this intent to decouple with China economically and technologically?
Well, only partially. I actually would be hesitant to use the term decouple because this differs profoundly with the Trump administration. Now, they are due to the different reasons. This is not entirely about China. This is related with COVID-19, related with Texas storms, and the concern about the terrorists and cyber attacks. Now, of course, it's also related with geopolitics and economic competition with China. Now, when we look at these four different areas, I mean, for example, technological competition, we know that the chips produced in the U.S. decreased from 37 in the world in 1990 to only 12% now. Now, also look at the industrial development. This is related economic growth and protection of our American jobs, because some of the products lack of them become a bottleneck. So therefore, you do need to change and reallocate the industrial and production chain. And also in terms of urgent need supplies, like the medical supplies, as we know that last year, U.S. media constantly cover that 80% of medical supply come from China, and over 90% of antibiotics come from China. Certainly, this is not balanced in a way that any government will do some adjustment. Particularly early on, we know that there's a mask shortage, there's a ventilator shortage, and finally, it's the natural resources, the rare earth elements certainly related to China.
But of course, people are asking, will it make a difference? Because there was a reason why the supply chain moved out of the United States in the first place.
Well, you're absolutely right. This is a business firm, and the multinational companies are driven by the market, by the profit. And also that we know that the goal of these executive order is the same, is to reduce U.S. dependence on foreign countries. Now, to a certain extent, these are the right moves from a U.S. perspective and also receive a strong bipartisan support. But it will be very difficult to move around the entire supply chain or production chain, especially move back to the United States, because it involves so many factors, so many elements, so many countries, like the entire Asia. Some of our products will remove. It's not that easy. So in that regard, that there's still a lot of challenges. So my view is that some of the policies will be effective, and after this 100 days, and some probably still will be very, very difficult, very, very challenging to complete change, particularly the business behaviors of multinational companies.
And Biden is actually pressing a $37 billion funding to supercharge chip manufacturing at home. But here in China, similar things are happening because the threatening to supply Huawei with chips, the Chinese is running its own chip development strategies. What do you make of those trends?
Well, I think we should look at the broader context. China's remarkable catch-up in science technology over the past 4 decades. As we know, that's partly due to Chinese own efforts, the Chinese people's hard working, the government's right policy, and the Chinese talents. But it's also, its success should also be attributed to technology transfer and dissemination from the West, especially from the United States. Now, China has taken advantage of the openness of our American economy, universities, and the research institution, especially in terms of entrepreneur and the technology innovation. Now, this is not a secret. Everyone, noticed that. Now, but this fact has actually understandably led to rethinking and re-evaluation on the part of the United States. Policymakers in Washington have come to believe that the United States should not only limit high-end technology transfer to China, but also prevent the Chinese companies from accessing the high-tech market in the United States. But the point is that, as you mentioned earlier, U.S.-led technology decoupling with China and its punitive measures against Huawei and some other companies actually has led to further indigenous innovation in China. So in a way that China is already become technological leading power. In some areas that China probably even ahead of the United States, like artificial intelligence, like 5G. So in a way that it's not this kind of policy move will actually hurt U.S. rather than help U.S. But on the other hand, you can understand the mindset, the necessary adjustment from the U.S. side. I think the Chinese should have also better understanding the mindset and the motivation, and some of the concern probably valid, some probably will not work.
I think a lot of reasons behind this is the politics within the United States. Although President Trump lost in the election, but the political forces behind him is still haunting the U.S. politics. Do you think that the national sentiment to go more nationalistic and inward-looking will bind Biden's decision-making in international relations?
Well, I do not see that way. Of course, we should not blame everything to Trump or Trumpism, but certainly Trump and Biden are very different leaders, and they represent different worldviews. As we know that Trump talked about the unilateralism and really obsessed with economic protectionism. He alienated American allies everywhere and left international organizations one after another. So he constantly talked about America first. Actually, people outside the world interpret it as American only. Now, so which foreign countries will follow the country that is obsessed with its own interests? Now, Biden is just the opposite. And also that one thing which I wanted to emphasize that he wanted to invest in American workers. So therefore, that he believes that some of the Trump policy only benefit Wall Street. So you can see that some of the Democratic candidates for the election, like Bernie Sanders, like Elizabeth Warren, this is a part of the Democrats. They really talk about you fix this kind of problem. And Secretary Treasury Janet Yellen also put the priority on American workers for jobs and etc. So you can see the contrast. So in that regard, their views, their policies are quite different. Now, of course, I would be happy to talk about their different approach regarding China.
Obviously, the signature policy of Biden will probably be the Build Back America plan. But what does it involve for Americans to deliver on that? And what do you think China can do in this regard?
Well, first of all, we should go a little bit earlier that, Trump's policy is really seen by China with certain validity is that his administration, Trump administration, sought to defeat and destroy China in much the same way that the United States defeated the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Now, such an assessment is evident in the following three fronts. On the economic front, it's really a systematic and the complete decoupling with China. So now this is things that people in U.S. argue will hurt U.S. interest, but it's not something kind of remote or just impossible scenario. But it's already happened. It happened in virtually every domain on the economic front. Now the second is on the political ideological front. Wanted to pursue so-called regime change, and finally, on the military security front. Beijing fears that the U.S. will move toward support Taiwan's independence in light of the Taiwan Travel Act of 2018 and the Taipei Act 2019. Now, these are really led to the deterioration of bilateral relationship.
Yeah.
Now, but Biden's approach is different. Biden does not see China as an enemy. And he sees China as a competitor, although a potential rivalry. But again, he tried to avoid confrontation. But on the other hand, he certainly emphasized competition to protect American interests. So that should resonate well with American politics, American society. So, but it's a different approach. For example, that early on I mentioned about Trump's three approaches. But most importantly, related with that question, if you look at Biden's four agendas, top agendas, COVID-19, economic recovery, and racial and social justice, or social equality, and finally, the climate change. In these four areas, at least three, as Foreign Minister Wang Yi said, related with China, should intersect with China's U.S.-China relations, with cooperation with China, including COVID-19, global economic recovery, and especially climate change. But even in the third one, in terms of social justice, economic equality, and racial justice, it's related with immigration policy. Mm-hmm. This is not like by Trump administration, with use of racism and target Asian Americans, talk about the Gong flu, Chinese virus. So in the first few weeks in the office, President Biden has issued another executive order against the racial profiling of Asian Americans. So the administration will no longer employ terms like China virus or Gong flu to describe COVID-19. So I'm optimistic that a sensible view will prevail in the United States.
Another thing that Trump probably did successfully make it happen is the lack of communication between the two sides, not only in the political decision circle, but in business and cultural and academic exchanges. Do you think Biden is more prone to open up channels of communication? What difference would that make?
Well, I firmly believe that. I think there was strong connection between, the cultural war by the Trump administration. They obsessed with that, including some of the politicians or policymakers talk about the clash of the civilizations. You probably remember that term, a couple of years ago. So there's a connection between that kind of conceptual framework and the policy decisions in the last 2 or 3 years of the Trump administration. Now, these policy initiatives included sensationalizing China as a whole of society's threat to the United States, targeting Chinese and Chinese Americans scientists, claiming that Beijing is weaponizing a large number of Chinese students enrolled in U.S. universities, and even banning or restricting members of the Chinese Communist Party and their families, about 300 million people from visiting the United States. Now, these are the things that it's really surprised many people, because we know that under Obama administration, and particularly Hillary Clinton, Secretary Hillary Clinton, promoted a so-called 100,000 strong promoted educational exchange with China, issued 10 years visa. But all these things could be reversed. But that actually hurt the U.S. I think there's a culture and educational exchanges benefit from both. Now, but certainly that Biden understand that there's a different interest group in America, so they favor still engagement with China, including medical professions. Mm-hmm. And they certainly think that there should be a collaboration with China, and also educational institutions, American universities, and also local government, and also sports communities. I remember that the last year, a year ago, when Kirby Bryant,
died in a crash,
died tragically. There's so many Chinese mourn him. This is very touching. You can see the cultural diplomacy, play such an important role. I hope that the policymakers, I'm sure that Biden and many of his team members understand much better than some of the hawkish. Now, let me also mention, even in the Republican, there are a lot of people criticize this kind of educational cultural decoupling, and because ultimately this is American soft power, and also there's we should not forget U.S.-China relations, but also should be the American and Chinese relations. This is not just state to state. I think that important message was missed, largely in the previous administration.
All right. Thank you very much. Very interesting reflections on U.S.-China relations. Thank you, Cheng Li.
Thank you.
And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. We've been talking about China-U.S. relations. In the next part, we'll be talking to Douglas Paal on the security threats faced by both China and the United States. Don't go away. Be right back. Welcome to the second part of Dialogue on China-U.S. relations. I'm joined by Douglas Paal, Distinguished Fellow from Carnegie Endowment of International Peace. Mr. Paal, you've been serving as Director of Asian Affairs under Presidents Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Between then and now, Clinton, Bush Jr., Obama, and Trump. Where is China-U.S. relationship now, and what will Biden do about it?
Well, we're in a very different era from the time when I served in government. We had gone through a long period of interaction on a common adversary in the Soviet Union, and then we had to find a new way in the post-Cold War period, and now we're in the post-Cold War period, and China has grown dramatically, and the U.S. is experiencing some difficulties. And the combination has led to a period of greater suspicion, perhaps fear, and some tension. So it's a quite different atmosphere from the one experienced by us older types who dealt with an earlier China-U.S. relationship.
And Biden has called China the U.S. most serious competitor, and also expresses desire to work with China when it benefits the American people. But the question is, where is the line that cooperation stops and competition begins?
Well, we don't know yet. The Biden administration, led by a man who in late 1970s traveled early to China, who in 2012 hosted President Xi Jinping, then Vice President Xi Jinping, in the U.S. for important travel. At the same time, we've gone through a lot of change in the last few years, and public opinion has moved dramatically. Politicians tend to follow public opinion, and we've seen that in this case. Now, we are still in the first month, or a little more than a month, of this administration, and they're still getting people approved for positions through the nomination and confirmation process in the Congress. So there are a lot of things that have been unsaid, or things that have been repeated from the campaign trail, but we really don't know what they're going to do with the new administration. They haven't articulated their policies in detail yet. So it's hard to make an assessment of where that line lies between competition and cooperation.
In the recent speech, Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi called for a reset of bilateral relations. And Biden has always been saying we need to reconsider the relationship wholesale because it needs to coordinate with allied countries. And now Biden has already talked to G7 leaders. And have they already got what they want for the coordination part?
They may think so. My guess would be they do not have that yet. We saw a little bit of a friction between the United States and Europe during the transition from Biden to Trump, when the Europeans and the EU and the Chinese government formed a new agreement on investments, and the Biden transition team wanted that to slow down. It's going to take some time before everybody finds their footing. They get comfortable with each other's positions. They understand what's to be done. Again, it's still early in Biden's time. I'm not sure they are in a position in the Biden administration to convey the kind of substantive detail to partners in Asia or Europe or elsewhere that would give them an idea of what they're being asked to choose to support, or to choose to distance themselves, or to take a different line of approach to China.
But the problem is, does Biden feel the pressure? Because he has only limited time, the politics to worry about. In 2 years, there's going to be midterm elections. He has a lot of things on the plate, the COVID response, economic recoveries. But at the same time, China is waiting probably impatiently for a grand strategy from Biden.
Yes, the time horizon is short. If Biden is going to be a one-term president, which is not an impossibility, he's got to move quickly. And it's always like this with presidential transitions. You have months that seem to get lost, and then as soon as the first few months are over, you have to get everything done before the next electoral cycle hits. So we really talk about very compressed periods. March, April, I would start to look for results after the first 100-day reviews take place over trade policy, security policy, industrial policy, 100 days of success in fighting the COVID pandemic. And then we'll start to see more concrete choices being made. Right now, they're trying to get money to pay for the COVID fight and to sustain the economy from Congress, and there's not much else on the priority list beyond that that can be taken, where action can be taken at this moment.
And the political pressure he will face, because recently we've been reading Donald Trump is about to criticize Biden for his policies on China and others during the CPAC meetings very soon. Will Biden feel in the bind because politically he's not so secure in the Congress? So he needs to make less compromises with China?
Well, you know, in my experience with President Biden, he is a man of compromise. He comes from 36 years in the Senate, then time as vice president. And in those years, he learned to be someone who gets along with the other party, who tries to get along with the other party. It may not happen now, but on one subject, and almost one subject alone, there is a broad bipartisan consensus, and that is on China. People are skeptical about China across the board, and he has to take that into account. His own views, that of his administration, but also that of the opposition. And the opposition is not that far from coming back into power 2 or 4 years from now.
Yeah.
And he has to be very careful, as any leader must in a democracy.
But in order to cooperate with China, as the Chinese understand, we need a constructive atmosphere. If it's an all-out hostility from the United States, it wouldn't be very helpful.
Well, we've heard spokesman from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Zhao Lijian, say that you need the atmosphere to be improved in order to do cooperation. Other Chinese spokespeople, including Foreign Minister Wang, have not used conditionality to get back to cooperation. And I think given the mistrust between the two sides, I would counsel Chinese policymakers to think about trying to cooperate even if the atmosphere is not that congenial, because a record of cooperation will help to build an atmosphere of congeniality if one is to be built.
So which bricks foundations they will probably begin with?
Well, the climate agenda is there. The G20 is coming up. G20 will have to address how to get the global economy going again in the aftermath of the effects of the pandemic. What to do about bad debt from strapped developing countries. These are important issues that the calendar will turn up on leaders' agendas, whether or not they choose to do so.
And about security, Mr. Paal, since Biden's inauguration, U.S. naval operations in the South China Sea in the past month by either warships or carriers have got a lot of people's attention. Is there any practical meaning behind these exercises?
Well, the practical meaning is more of a technical nature. I would not draw large political conclusions from these exercises. The two carriers exercised in the South China Sea because one of the carriers was returning from an extended deployment in the Persian Gulf area. And when our Navy carrier battle groups pass each other, they tend to exercise together on an opportunistic basis. I don't think that was designed to send a message to China. It just happened to be when it happened to be. Other activities that are going on are consistent with the recent years of behavior. The Biden team does not seem to have had a focus on changing those patterns or a policy context in which they would consider making adjustments. So I would not read a lot of political significance into these recent developments on the American side.
But there's another development that maybe the Chinese are reading very closely. That is U.S., Japan, and France will hold joint military drills for the first time in May. And to bring more allied countries into the fold, even those European allies, it seems something new.
Well, the French are indicating their interest, and the Germans as well. The British have, and the Indians will. So I think we'll see more global disposition of these relatively modest forces in an effort to, one, sustain those countries' own interests in the region. France, after all, does have Pacific territories, but it's also to get a good, solid practice in cooperating between military units so that they have the alliance operational compatibility that you need to do through training.
So there are two explanations. One is that, from the Chinese perspective, it's just flexing muscles. The other is they are seriously making preparations for conflicts in this part of the world. Which is more likely?
I doubt that muscle flexing is a big part of this. The French have very complicated, the Germans, the British have very complicated interests with China, and I don't think they would think of themselves as flexing muscles. Nor do I think that they're preparing any kind of military action. I think you have to broaden the lens to look at this in a bigger context. And if this is sustained, it goes repeatedly in certain directions or certain kinds of exercises, you might draw some conclusions that for Chinese might look negative, but I think it would be premature to draw those conclusions now.
About cross-strait relationship, of course, you've been observing this for a very long time. Do you expect any new kind of surprises across strait relations?
Well, we had a lot of surprises at the end of the Trump administration, and I think we're a little tired of that. We in America are a little tired of that. I think even the Taiwanese are a little tired of these exercises and changes in behavior. The earliest signals that are very subtle from the Biden administration suggest continue to develop warm, unofficial relations with Taiwan in a substantive fashion. But we'll do it still within the one China policy context. I think that was symbolized when Anthony Blinken, as a transition official, accepted a congratulatory phone call from Taiwan's leader, Tsai Ing-wen. That was not done directly to the president. It was done in a way that's familiar from the past. And I think that was a way of subtly signaling what I just said, which is they want to have good, warm, substantive relations, but they don't want to break out of the one China policy, which has provided stability in the Taiwan Strait now for 40 years.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Paal, for your insights and analysis. Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you.
And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Zhou in Beijing. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.